If you've ever seen a Zylaxian trying to look down their nose at someone, which is quite a feat considering they have 3 of them arranged in a triangle, you'd know exactly how MX. Zylaxian appeared that morning. The prestigious mathematics teacher at the Galactic Academy had perfected the art of simultaneous tri-nostril disdain, a skill that had taken centuries to master. Today, however, they had a special reason for their enhanced superiority complex. The first human student had joined their advanced theoretical mathematics class. The classroom itself was a testament to the Galactic Federation's self-importance. Hovering quantum boards lined the walls, their surfaces rippling with 12-dimensional equations that would make most species' brains leak out their ears. The students' seats weren't mere chairs but individual learning pods that adjusted their quantum field harmonics based on each species' preferred learning state. All very impressive, very advanced, and very, very expensive. Class MX. Zylaxian's voice resonated through their speech chambers, creating that particularly annoying harmonic that they insisted was perfect for mathematical instruction. Today marks a historic occasion. They managed to make historic sound like they were describing something they'd found stuck to their shoe. As you're aware, Earth has recently joined the Galactic Federation, and in the spirit of inclusive education, they paused to let out a subtle vibration that, in Zylaxian culture, indicated deep skepticism. We have our first human student. Standing near the doorway was Sarah Chen, looking about as comfortable as a Vraxian slug at a SALT convention. Unlike her classmates, who sported everything from crystalline, thought matrices to quantum-entangled neural networks, she carried an actual physical notebook. A paper notebook. Someone in the back of the class let out an involuntary gasp of horror. Sarah's dark eyes scanned the room, taking in the array of alien faces, or what passed for faces among some species. There were the crystalline axiomates, whose thoughts literally sparkled inside their transparent craniums. The gaseous nebulons floated in their containment fields, their consciousness dispersed through clouds of intelligent vapor. And of course the quantum collective of Row 9, which existed in a state of mathematical superposition and had to be observed carefully lest they solve every equation simultaneously and crash the university's reality servers. Again. You may take your seat, MS. Chen MX. Zylaxian said, their tri-nostrils flaring in sequence, the Zylaxian equivalent of an eye roll. I trust you can operate the learning pod without assistance? It's quite advanced technology, you understand. Nothing like your Earth. What do you call them? Calculators. The scattered snickers around the room were cut short as Sarah walked to her pod, pressed exactly 3 buttons in quick succession, and had the system calibrated to human neural patterns before MX. Zylaxian could finish their condescending smile. The teacher's middle nostril twitched, a sure sign of irritation. Well, this was going to be interesting. Primitives, MX. Zylaxian thought, watching Sarah Chen pull out her archaic notebook. They still think in 3 dimensions. Maybe 4 if they're feeling particularly ambitious. The teacher's 3 hearts pulsed in their traditional sequence of superiority, lub-dub whoosh. Today they announced, their voice modulating through the 17 tones of academic authority, we will discuss the practical applications of quantum-entangled mathematics in calculating the probability curves of parallel universe divergence. They projected a complex equation onto the quantum board, its symbols spinning lazily in 12 dimensions. Surely even our newest student can appreciate the elegant simplicity of the standard quantum divergence formula. The equation hung in the air like a mathematical chandelier, dripping with Greek symbols, Riemann tensors, and at least 3 types of infinity that hadn't been discovered on Earth yet. A nebulon student in the back row actually condensed slightly in excitement. Now MX. Zylaxian continued, who can tell me why we use the Yog-Sothoth coefficient instead of the more traditional Fibonacci sequence in trans-dimensional calculations? 17 appendages of varying compositions shot into the air. Sarah's hand remained down, her eyes fixed on the equation as she sketched something in her notebook, probably drawing stick figures, MX. Zylaxian thought smugly. Ah, yes, Exhala they called on a crystalline being whose thoughts were literally transparent. Because the Fibonacci sequence is limited by its basis in physical space-time, Exhala chimed, their crystalline structure resonating with mathematical certainty. The Yog-Sothoth coefficient accounts for the 17 primary axes of reality. Excellent. Though you forgot to mention the quantum entanglement factor of the 11th dimension, but we can't all be perfect, MX. Zylaxian's middle nostril twitched with satisfaction. Perhaps our Earth student would like to contribute. Any basic observations. Sarah glanced up from her notebook, where she'd been writing something that looked suspiciously like actual calculations. I was just wondering, she said quietly, about the efficiency of using the Yog-Sothoth coefficient when dealing with localized quantum events. Wouldn't a modified version of Earth's chaos theory provide a more elegant solution for small-scale calculations? The silence that followed was so complete you could have heard a cork drop. One of the nebulons actually dissipated slightly in shock. I see, MX. Zylaxian's voice dripped with artificial patience. And I suppose next you'll suggest we start using abacuses instead of quantum computers. The class tittered appreciatively, except for the quantum collective, who were still trying to understand the concept of physical counting tools without crashing. Sarah shrugged and returned to her notes. But MX. Zylaxian didn't miss the slight smile playing at the corners of her mouth. It was the kind of smile that suggested she knew something they didn't, which was clearly impossible. After all, humans had only mastered faster than light travel, 50 years ago? The Zylaxians had been doing advanced quantum mathematics when humans were still arguing about whether the Earth was flat. Around the room, the other students were exchanging knowing looks or whatever passed for looks among the non-ocular species. The axiomates' thoughts were practically sparkling with amusement, their crystalline structures refracting equations that were far beyond primitive human mathematics. Even the usually diplomatic quantum collective was vibrating at the quietly superior frequency. But there was something about the way Sarah kept writing in that notebook, something about her complete lack of intimidation in a room full of beings who could calculate the mathematical probability of her entire species' existence as a homework assignment. It was unsettling. Well, MX. Zylaxian thought, their three nostrils synchronizing in determination. Perhaps it's time to show everyone exactly why humans should stick to their simple arithmetic. Their middle heart gave an extra smug pump as they began formulating the perfect problem, one that would put this upstart human in her place once and for all. If only they'd noticed that Sarah had already filled 3 pages with calculations that would have made Einstein weep with joy. MX. Zylaxian spent exactly 7.3 minutes measured in Earth time, which they found charmingly primitive, constructing what they considered to be the perfect mathematical trap. Their 3 hearts beat in the rhythm of imminent victory as their tentacles danced across the quantum interface, weaving together strands of mathematical complexity that would make a supercomputer beg for mercy. The equation system that materialized on the quantum board was a thing of terrible beauty. It started with a seemingly innocent series of partial differentials, spiraled through 7 dimensions of quantum uncertainty, and ended with what appeared to be a mathematical representation of the sound of one hand clapping in a vacuum. Several students gasped. A nebulon temporarily lost molecular cohesion. The quantum collective began humming the universal frequency for "Oh snap." MS, Chen MX. Zylaxian practically purred, all 3 nostrils vibrating with anticipation. Perhaps you'd care to solve this little warm-up exercise. Sarah looked up from her notebook, where she'd been absently doodling what looked like a Klein bottle playing fetch with a Mobius strip. Her eyes scanned the board, taking in the mathematical equivalent of a tactical nuclear strike. Now, don't feel pressured, MX. Zylaxian continued, their voice dripping with fake concern. This is merely a standard problem that our 3rd cycle students should find manageable. Though, of course, given Earth's developing educational system. They let the sentence hang in the air like a poorly balanced equation. The class watched with a mixture of pity and poorly concealed amusement as Sarah stood up. An axiomate actually started crystallizing a recording structure to preserve what they assumed would be a spectacular mathematical fail for posterity. The equation system on the board was, in fact, a masterpiece of academic sadism. It required simultaneous solving across multiple quantum states, understanding of transdimensional calculus, and at least 3 mathematical concepts that hadn't been invented on Earth yet. Or so MX. Zylaxian thought. Sarah walked to the board with the calm of someone who either had no idea what they were getting into or knew exactly what they were doing. The class couldn't decide which would be more entertaining. O and MS. Chen MX. Zylaxian added, their middle nostril twitching with barely suppressed glee. Please show your work. All 17 steps of it. We wouldn't want anyone to think you're guessing. Sarah picked up the quantum stylus, testing its weight in her hand. For a moment she just stood there, head tilted slightly, studying the mathematical monstrosity before her. The silence in the room grew so intense that you could hear the quantum collective's uncertainty principle fluctuating. Interesting approach, she murmured, just loud enough for everyone to hear. Though I have a question before I start. MX. Zylaxian's nostrils flared and sequenced their species equivalent of a condescending smile. Of course, dear. Would you like me to explain what a differential equation is? Several students had to suppress their various species versions of giggles. The nebulons actually formed little laugh-shaped clouds. Sarah's lips curved in a slight smile. Actually, I was wondering why you're using the standard Calabi-Yau manifold for the quantum uncertainty calculations when a modified Poincare conjecture would be more efficient. The silence that followed was so complete you could have heard a photon change its mind about being a wave or a particle. MX. Zylaxian's 3 nostrils froze mid-twitch. What? Never mind, Sarah said cheerfully, turning back to the board. I'll just solve it both ways. You know, for comparison. She raised the quantum stylus, and that's when everyone noticed something odd about her stance. She wasn't holding the stylus like someone preparing to write equations. She was holding it like an artist about to paint a masterpiece. The quantum collective began vibrating at the frequency of this is about to get good, they weren't wrong. What happened next would later be described by the quantum collective as the moment probability threw up its hands and went home. Sarah began to write, and it wasn't the careful, plodding progress everyone expected from a primitive human. Instead, her hand moved with the fluid grace of a conductor, leading some bizarre mathematical orchestra. First, she completely ignored the conventional starting point of the quantum differential and instead drew a simple circle. The class watched in confused fascination as she quickly transformed it into an earth symbol that several recognized, the yin-yang. You see, Sarah explained, her voice carrying the same calm certainty as her pen strokes. Earth mathematicians learned long ago that sometimes the most complex problems are better understood through simple patterns. The yin-yang morphed into a series of interlocking fractals that somehow, impossibly, began matching the quantum probability curves of the original equation. MX. Zylaxian's 3 nostrils twitched in rapid succession, the Zylaxian equivalent of a double take. But that's not the proper procedure. You can't just. Actually, Sarah interrupted politely, already adding another layer of complexity to her solution. Earth mathematicians have a saying, all roads lead to Rome. It's a metaphor, but it applies perfectly to advanced mathematics. There's rarely just one right way to solve a problem. Her hands continued moving, and suddenly the fractals were dancing with quantum variables, but not in the sterile, traditional way taught at the Academy. She was weaving them together with Earth's chaos theory, creating a mathematical tapestry that was both beautiful and bizarre. A gasp rippled through the class as the first part of the solution emerged. The axiomate's crystalline structures were vibrating in harmonic resonance with the pure mathematical beauty of it. Even the nebulons had condensed into tight, attentive clouds. You see, while you're using the Yog-Sothoth coefficient to brute force your way through the quantum uncertainty. Sarah continued, her hands never stopping. Earth mathematicians discovered that uncertainty itself follows patterns. We call it the butterfly effect, the idea that complex systems have underlying simplicities and simple actions can have complex consequences. She was now simultaneously solving both her approach and the traditional method, her hands moving in a blur across the quantum board. The 2 solutions grew side by side, like some strange mathematical garden, but Sarah's version was clearly more elegant, using half the steps and a quarter of the energy. Impossible, whispered an axiomate, their thoughts literally crystallizing in shock. She's using primitive Earth mathematics to improve our quantum calculations. The quantum collective was vibrating so intensely they had to be reminded not to accidentally solve every equation in the universe again. Sarah had reached the crucial point, the part where the quantum uncertainty was supposed to make the calculations break down into an unsolvable mess. Instead, she drew a series of simple Earth symbols PE and FH, the golden ratio. Then she began connecting them with the alien mathematics in ways that made several students question their understanding of reality. Classic Earth mathematics recognized these as fundamental constants, she explained, her voice taking on a hint of enthusiasm. They appear everywhere in nature, from the spiral of galaxies to the pattern of seeds in a sunflower. When you combine them with quantum mechanics, she made one final, elegant connection, and suddenly the entire solution clicked into place like the last piece of a cosmic puzzle. MX. Zylaxian's 3 hearts were beating in completely different rhythms, a sign of severe mathematical distress. But that's not. You can't. Oh, look, Sarah said, stepping back from her completed work. My way only took 11 steps instead of 17, and it should be about 43% more efficient in practical applications. She paused, then added with a small smile, I can explain the proof for that efficiency calculation if you'd like. The quantum board now displayed 2 complete solutions: the traditional method, looking clunky and overcomplicated, and Sarah's version, an elegant fusion of Earth and alien mathematics that seemed to hum with its own internal harmony. The nebulons had formed themselves into exclamation points. The axiomates were frantically copying every detail of her solution into their crystalline memory structures. The quantum collective had achieved a state of mathematical enlightenment that their species had been seeking for millennia. And there stood Sarah, calmly putting the quantum stylus back in its holder, that same quiet smile on her face. She'd not only solved the impossible equation, she'd revolutionized the method of solving it. Would anyone like me to explain how the Mandelbrot set principles I used here could be applied to other quantum calculations? She asked innocently. I have some ideas about improving the efficiency of trans-dimensional math using concepts from Earth's string theory. The room erupted into chaos. The quantum collective accidentally solved pi to its final digit. They agreed to pretend they hadn't, for the sake of future mathematicians. 3 nebulons achieved spontaneous academic enlightenment. And an axiomate began restructuring their entire crystalline matrix to incorporate this new understanding of mathematical reality. Through it all, MX. Zylaxian stood frozen, all 3 nostrils completely still for the first time in their teaching career, staring at the board where their perfect trap had been transformed into a testament to the surprising sophistication of primitive human mathematics. Sarah quietly returned to her seat and opened her notebook again. And if anyone had looked closely, they might have noticed she was now drawing what appeared to be a Klein bottle teaching quantum physics to a Schrodinger's cat. The silence that followed Sarah's demonstration wasn't just any silence. It was the kind of silence that makes quantum uncertainty feel like a solid fact. MX. Zylaxian's 3 hearts were attempting to beat in completely new rhythms previously unknown to their species' cardiac system. There's more, Sarah said, flipping through her notebook, that primitive paper thing that everyone had laughed at earlier. While I was solving your equation, I noticed something interesting about the underlying quantum framework we're all using. She stood again, but this time with none of the previous hesitation. The class watched, entranced, as she began drawing what looked like a simple Earth theorem that even MX. Zylaxian recognized the Pythagorean theorem. You see, your quantum mathematics are built on the assumption that reality follows certain rules, she explained, her hand moving swiftly across the board. But Earth mathematicians discovered something fascinating. Sometimes the rules themselves can be flexible. The quantum collective began vibrating at a frequency that suggested they were having an existential crisis. Good thing they existed in multiple states simultaneously. At least some versions of them were handling this well. We call it metamathematics, Sarah continued, her diagram evolving into something that made the axiomate's crystalline thoughts scatter like startled birds. The study of how mathematical systems themselves behave, and when you apply it to quantum calculations. She drew one final connection, and suddenly the entire quantum board lit up with new possibilities. It was as if someone had opened a window in a stuffy room, and fresh mathematical air was pouring in. Impossible, MX. Zylaxian whispered, but their middle nostril was twitching in a way that suggested they were beginning to question everything they'd ever taught. Your species only achieved spaceflight a century ago. You still use physical writing implements. You can't possibly. Actually. Sarah smiled. We spent a lot of time thinking about abstract concepts precisely because we didn't have advanced technology. When you can't build a quantum computer, you have to really understand the math behind quantum mechanics. When you can't travel between dimensions, you spend more time theorizing about how dimensions work. A nebulon in the back row had become so excited it had split into two separate clouds of conscious gas, both of them frantically taking notes. For instance, Sarah continued, pointing to a section of her solution. This part here uses principles developed by an Earth mathematician who spent his life working in a patent office. He changed our understanding of space, time, and reality itself, armed with nothing but a pencil and paper. The quantum collective was now humming at the frequency of mind equals blown a pitch that was causing several of the crystalline students to resonate sympathetically. MX. Zylaxian's third heart, the one responsible for processing mathematical revelations, was working overtime. They stared at their own carefully constructed problem, seeing it now through new eyes, all 17 of them. The elegant simplicity of Earth's mathematical principles wasn't primitive at all. It was foundational, fundamental, like finding the source code of the universe. But perhaps the most interesting thing, Sarah said, casually drawing what appeared to be a Mobius strip eating its own tail, is how Earth's primitive mathematics and advanced alien quantum theory complement each other. Look at how the golden ratio appears in both systems. But we've been using it in completely different ways. Together she connected a few more lines, and suddenly half the class gasped as an entirely new mathematical principle emerged from the combination. The axiomates were literally glowing with excitement, their thoughts refracting through their crystalline bodies in patterns that would revolutionize at least 3 different fields of mathematics. The nebulons had formed themselves into complex equations, unconsciously mimicking Sarah's solutions. And MX. Zylaxian? Their nostrils were performing a completely new dance, one that their species had never seen before. It was the dance of a teacher realizing they had just become a student. MS. Chen, they said finally, their voice modulating through frequencies of humility previously unknown to their vocal range. Would you perhaps be interested in teaching a seminar on Earth mathematical principles? The quantum collective immediately existed in a state of both having already attended this theoretical seminar and desperately wanting to attend it. It was giving them a bit of a headache, but they didn't care. Sarah closed her notebook, that suddenly not so primitive paper notebook, that probably contained enough mathematical revelations to keep the Galactic Academy busy for decades. I'd be happy to, she said. Though you might want to prepare the quantum boards for some really interesting calculations. Earth's game theory alone is going to blow your minds. The class erupted in a chaos of excitement that transcended species boundaries. The only calm spot was Sarah's seat, where she sat quietly drawing what looked suspiciously like a proof that might just revolutionize trans-dimensional travel. And in the corner, MX. Zylaxian's 3 hearts finally synchronized into a new rhythm, the beat of someone who had just discovered that the universe was far more interesting than they had imagined. The next day's class began very differently. For one thing, MX. Zylaxian's 3 nostrils were perfectly aligned in the humble pie configuration, a pose so rare that several students discreetly recorded it for posterity. Before we begin today's lesson, they announced, their voice modulating through the frequencies of formal apology, I believe I owe our class, and particularly MS. Chen, an acknowledgement. All 3 hearts performed the traditional Zylaxian mea culpa rhythm. I allowed my preconceptions about human mathematics to cloud my judgment. In doing so, I violated the first principle of scientific inquiry: never assume you know all the answers. The quantum collective vibrated supportively, existing simultaneously in states of forgiveness, and told you so. Perhaps MX. Zylaxian continued, their middle nostril twitching thoughtfully. MS. Chen could help us understand how humans developed such unique approaches to mathematics. Sarah stood up, carrying her notebook, which several students were now eyeing with something approaching reverence. The axiomates had even started carrying paper notebooks themselves, though they weren't quite sure which end to write with yet. Earth mathematics evolved out of necessity, she explained, sketching a simple timeline on the quantum board. When ancient humans needed to predict flood seasons, they developed geometry. When they built pyramids, they discovered trigonometry. Each problem we faced pushed our understanding further. The nebulons had formed themselves into question marks, absorbing every word. But here's the interesting part, Sarah continued, drawing a complex diagram. Because we didn't have quantum computers or transdimensional calculators, we had to develop strong theoretical frameworks. We learned to see patterns in everything from the spiral of galaxies to the branching of trees. "Ah," exclaimed an axiomate, their crystalline structure vibrating with sudden understanding. "Like your Fibonacci sequence, it appears in nature before you had tools to measure it." Exactly, Sarah beamed. And that's why Earth mathematicians spent so much time on pure theory. We couldn't measure 11 dimensions, so we had to imagine them. We couldn't observe quantum states, so we had to theorize about them. MX. Zylaxian's third heart skipped a beat, the Zylaxian equivalent of a light bulb moment. So while we were building tools to measure the universe, we were building frameworks to understand it, Sarah finished. Different paths to the same destination. The class had unconsciously arranged itself into a circle around Sarah, species differences forgotten in the shared excitement of discovery. Even the quantum collective had settled into a single probability state, a rare event, usually reserved for universal constants. But surely, a Nebulon student wafted hopefully, we could combine our approaches, your Earth theories with our quantum tools. Sarah's smile widened as she drew a complex diagram that somehow merged Earth's abstract mathematics with alien quantum calculations. "That's exactly what I was hoping you'd suggest. Look what happens when we apply Earth's chaos theory to your quantum probability matrices." The next hour was a blur of intellectual fusion. The axiomate's crystalline thoughts merged with human geometric proofs. The nebulon's gaseous calculations intertwined with Earth's abstract algebra. The quantum collective existed in a superposition of human and alien mathematical understanding that threatened to solve every equation in the universe again. And through it all, MX. Zylaxian watched with all three hearts beating the rhythm of discovery. Their nostrils had relaxed into the enlightened position, a pose many would later swear they had never seen in all their centuries of teaching. "Perhaps," they said as the class wound down, "we have all learned something more valuable than mathematics today," their voice modulated through the frequencies of wisdom. "Every species, every civilization, has something unique to contribute to the universal pursuit of knowledge." Sarah nodded, closing her notebook, which now had several dozen requests from classmates to borrow it. "On Earth, we have a saying, mathematics is the universal language. Turns out we were more right than we knew." The class dispersed slowly, species mingling in excited discussion. The nebulons were trying to figure out how to hold pencils with their gaseous appendages. The axiomates were attempting to teach the quantum collective about Earth's origami, resulting in some interesting probability folding. And MX. Zylaxian. MX. Zylaxian approached Sarah's desk, all three nostrils arranged in perfect humility. "Ms. Chen, I wonder if you might be interested in co-teaching an advanced seminar, Comparative Mathematical Methodologies Across Species Approach." Sarah's smile could have lit up a black hole. "I'd be honored, though we might need more notebooks." As they left the classroom, a small group of students from various species had already formed a study group, their voices excited as they discussed the possibilities of merging their mathematical traditions. The quantum collective was even trying to exist in a state of using both paper and quantum calculations simultaneously. And somewhere in the great mathematical symphony of the universe, numbers danced together in perfect harmony, caring little whether they were calculated by quantum computer or scratched out by hand in a paper notebook. After all, mathematics truly was the universal language. They just hadn't realized it could be spoken with so many delightful accents.